Any organization that succeeds, whether it's a multi-billion-dollar company, whether it's the deli down the corner, a school, a church, or a medium-sized company, any organization that succeeds and that maximizes its success has to do two things well at the highest, most simple level. First, they have to be smart. Well, what's smart mean? That means they've got to be good at marketing and strategy and technology and partnerships and finance, all the intellectual sciences that most business schools and business media focus on. This is important stuff. I started my career as a management consultant at Bain & Company, and essentially what we were there is to help companies make smarter decisions by doing analysis. This stuff is critical. Nobody should tell you it's not, because it is, and it's fun. I think it's interesting. Strategy, marketing, finance, all that stuff. The problem is, it's only half the equation in making our organizations successful. The other side of the equation only gets about 5% of the attention. See, we spend most of our time making our organization smart. But the other side of the equation is critical, and that's in addition to being smart, our organizations have to be healthy. What does that mean? Well, a healthy organization is one that minimizes politics and confusion and maximizes morale and productivity, not in some esoteric sense, but in a very real sense, and minimizes turnover among its best people. When most CEOs that I work with see this slide, they say, Pat, I'd give my left leg for the stuff on the right, because that stuff keeps me up at night. I know it costs us money. It drives me crazy. But I don't know how to measure it. I didn't really learn about that. It's probably kind of messy and emotional. You know, I'll tell you what, let's just go tweak the dials on the left a little bit more. They're like that old episode of I Love Lucy where Ricky comes home and finds Lucy crawling around the living room on her hands and knees. He says, what are you doing? She says, I'm looking for my earrings. He said, you lost your earrings out here in the living room? She says, no, I lost them in the bedroom, but the light out here is much better. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you, the light is better on the left side of this chart. Because it's a lot easier to study and measure and objectively observe and put on a Gantt chart and a spreadsheet the smart part of running our business. And again, I'm not going to tell you that it's not important, but what I am going to tell you is this. We're spending a disproportionate amount of our time making our organizations smarter and not enough making them healthier. And why is that important to be healthy? Because the health of our organization is what allows us to tap into the smart side. It's the multiplier effect of our intelligence. And let me tell you, I've worked with a lot of organizations that were really intelligent, but only tapped into a fraction of that because they were so dysfunctional as an organization. And you know something? I've worked with almost no organizations that were really healthy, but were just too darn dumb to succeed. And let me tell you, I worked with Southwest Airlines. I've worked with a lot of great clients, but I love to talk about Southwest because they are an amazing case study. An amazing case study. And the thing about Southwest Airlines is, and with all due apologies to them, they're not smarter than United and Delta and Continental. They don't have people with more PhDs and more industry experience. What they are is they're the healthiest organization you're ever going to see. And that's why they do so well. And I will tell you this, behind the scenes, they're more impressive than they are in the media. The things you've heard about them, they're even better behind the scenes. And their competitive advantage, and I believe the most accessible and high potential competitive advantage available to all of us today, is building a healthier organization. Because in this era of nanosecond technology change and ubiquitous information, it's so easy to copy another company's strategy or technology or finance. But if you can build a culture, if you can do those simple things, but difficult things to build a culture, you create a competitive advantage that is actually more sustainable than anything else. How do we build a healthy organization? Well, there's four disciplines that all healthy organizations have to have. The first thing they have to do is they have to build and maintain a cohesive leadership team, which is what we're going to talk about in a second. You have to build and maintain a cohesive leadership team. Behaviorally, they have to be cohesive. That's what I'm going to talk about today. But in addition to that, and concurrently, you have to create organizational clarity, which means you have to get them intellectually aligned as well. Whether the answer is right or not, I don't know. They just have to have the same answer in their head about why do we exist, what's our strategy, what are our key goals, what are our values, all those things. Jim Collins does a good job talking about that. You've seen a lot of this. But they have to be intellectually aligned as well as behaviorally aligned. Once they do these first two things, then, and only then, they have to move on to the next one, which is they have to over-communicate that clarity. They have to communicate it over and over and over again, and over and over again, and over again, and over again. They say now, research shows that employees in an organization have to hear things 7 times before they believe it. 7 times. And I think that's because of the old Dilbert effect, you know, where, God bless you, where everybody says, you know, employees are our greatest asset. Quality is job one. Customers are always right. You know, want. It's like an old Charlie Brown episode where the adults are talking, you know. It's like, whatever. The last company I worked at said that. The next one will too. It's only when people hear things over and over again and repeatedly in different forums and in different ways and from different people that they start to actually believe it. And yet most leaders I know don't like to over-communicate. Most leaders I know, whether they're a Myers-Briggs NT, which means rational for those of you who know, or just most leaders for whatever reason don't like to over-communicate because they find it to be redundant. And so many CEOs I work with fear redundancy. They find it to be a waste of time, and they don't want to insult their audience by repeating themselves. They're like that old story of the husband whose wife says to him, and it could be the other way around, but it seems to work better. The wife says to her husband, "Why don't you ever tell me you love me?" And he says, "Well, I told you when we got married, I'll let you know if it changes." Right? And that is so true of many CEOs. You know, they're like, "So why don't you repeat this?" Well, I gave that speech at the beginning of the year at the kickoff meeting, and I put the white paper. I haven't changed anything. Great leaders have to over-communicate. They cannot fear being redundant in their communication of critical messages. As I like to say, if you're a great leader, then your people should be able to do a good impression of you when you're not around. As parents, we know this. I know if my twin boys say, "If Dad tells me not to do drugs one more time," I'm like, "Hey, fine, I'm going to say it till you get blue in the face." We as leaders have to do a better job of over-communicating. And then finally, we have to build some human systems, which sounds very wonky and boring. But we have to put in place some human system, some structure around how we manage people, how we hire, fire, reward, motivate. And the key to those human systems, all I'll say about this is they need to institutionalize our culture without bureaucratizing it. I wish I knew who came up with that phrase, because it wasn't me, and I love it. We have to institutionalize our culture without bureaucratizing it. Too often, we go to one extreme or the other. We say, we don't need a hiring profile, we don't need systems, people know when they're a good hire, or we don't need to do performance management. Or they go to the other extreme where they over-structure it, and they build a performance management system that's 12 pages long, and everybody has to get a lawyer to sign off, and an HR person, and somebody from the government, and nobody likes doing it. And the right answer is somewhere in between. Okay, the 5 dysfunctions of a team. Let's just jump into this. The first dysfunction of a team is the absence of trust. The absence of trust. Now, you're sitting there going, "Yeah, he's right. This is simple. I already knew this. I can't believe people pay this guy to tell us that teams have to trust each other." And it is simple, but there is a nuance to this that's important. When I talk about trust on a team, I'm not talking about predictive trust, which is what most people think, which says you and I have known each other long enough to know that if you say something, I know what you really mean by that and what you'll do. Or if I promise you I'm going to do something, you know what that's going to look like. You can predict my behavior because we've known each other long enough or worked together long enough. Well, that's not what trust on a team is about. Any group of people that have worked together long enough or known each other long enough will have predictive trust. The kind of trust I'm talking about on a team is what I call vulnerability-based trust. Vulnerability-based trust. That's the kind of trust that comes about when human beings on a team can and will say things to one another like, "I don't know the answer, I think I need help, I'm screwing this thing up, you're much smarter than me, teach me how to be more like you in that regard," or even, "I'm sorry, what I said was totally out of line." When human beings on a team can be emotionally buck naked with each other and don't cover up who they are, strengths and weaknesses alike, it creates an amazingly powerful dynamic. How do we build that kind of trust? Well, here's the deal. The role of the leader is critical. I like to say this. I don't like overly hierarchical organizations, but I love hierarchy because you got to have a leader. You got to know who's ultimately driving that. And the leader has to go first in demonstrating vulnerability. The fear of conflict. Conflict on a team is a good thing. But I'm talking about productive ideological conflict, not interpersonal conflict. Passionate debate around issues is a good thing on a team. Lack of commitment. If we don't have conflict on our teams, we're not going to get commitment. Why not? Because, see, I fundamentally believe that if people don't weigh in on an issue, they don't buy into a decision. The avoidance of accountability. You see, people don't hold each other accountable for what they're supposed to do enough. Notice what I just said. They don't hold each other accountable enough. Peer-to-peer accountability. When I talk about accountability on a team, I'm not talking about the leader. The leader has to be the ultimate arbiter of accountability, no doubt. But it's peer pressure, person-to-person accountability on the team that's the most important. Why is it so important to have a culture of accountability? I know we're used to talking about accountability and it's a buzzword, but why is it important that people know that they're going to be held accountable and that they're going to hold one another accountable for doing what's right? It's so that we don't have the final dysfunction of a team, which is the inattention to results. The inattention to results. And what we're talking about here is a focus on the collective outcomes on the team. And that's what the leader has to do. It's like, I've got to be focused on the collective good of the team.
Veremos que la psicología crea la economía, que todo cuanto vivimos no es más que la manifestación de un conjunto de procesos psicológicos conscientes o inconscientes. El inconsciente es muy tramposo porque es inconsciente, porque no te das cuenta de que está ahí. Desde el inconsciente funcionamos por inercia. Desde la consciencia podemos construir la calidad. Quizás el gran reto es este. Muchas veces se atribuye al azar, a la suerte, lo que es el resultado de un esfuerzo personal, de una realización personal. Quizás la palabra realización deberíamos recuperarla y a veces incluso darle mayor protagonismo que la palabra éxito, porque quizás la palabra éxito se ha pervertido mucho con el tiempo. Hoy se confunde el éxito con la notoriedad barata, con el aparecer en los medios de comunicación y decir cualquier estupidez. Éxito en su origen viene de exitus, que quiere decir en latín salida, de ahí el exit inglés. Por lo tanto, los clásicos consideraban que el éxito solo se podía evaluar al final de la existencia. Y tiene mucho sentido porque, miren, lo veremos enseguida, lo que a veces nos parece un revés, con el tiempo se transforma quizás en una bendición. Y lo que nos puede parecer un golpe de suerte, con el tiempo quizás es una zancadilla que nos implicará pasar por una situación difícil, donde el desenlace final dependerá de cómo nosotros lo vivamos y también de la influencia de ese signo de la suerte. En cambio, la realización no ha sido afectada por una confusión en el pensamiento. La realización nos hace referencia a dos conceptos. Uno, en inglés, to realize, darse cuenta, tomar conciencia, despertar. El segundo es transformar la realidad, porque tiene la misma raíz etimológica. Transformar la realidad desde la conciencia. Miren, Ralph Waldo Emerson, que era un filósofo trascendentalista americano del siglo XIX, coetáneo de Henry David Thoreau y de Walt Whitman, grandes pensadores, lúcidos pensadores, decía Emerson que antes de adquirir un gran poder uno debe adquirir la sabiduría para poderlo gestionar. Antes de adquirir un gran poder debes adquirir la sabiduría para poderlo gestionar. En el fondo el dinero podríamos decir que no es más que una forma de potencial de transformación, de acción, de energía. Llámenle como quieran. El dinero es un potencial para hacer y transformar. Que de repente te llegue una cifra elevadísima de recursos financieros a tu cuenta corriente cuando no has tenido la consciencia para generar el valor al valor del dinero o una cultura de ahorro, es como si a un niño de 5 años le ponen a conducir un Ferrari. Lo más probable es que acabe estampando el vehículo en algún lugar y haciendo daño a alguien. ¿Qué características tiene el 10% que sobrevive al golpe de suerte? Pues son personas que han desarrollado una cultura de ahorro. No quiere decir que tengan ahorrado mucho dinero. Pueden tener ahorrados, aunque sean $1.500, $1.000. Pero centavo a centavo han construido esa cifra. Característica segunda, no dejan el trabajo que están haciendo. Para los que pierden ese dinero, sí, el dinero es una huida hacia adelante y cambian completamente sus situaciones de vida. Es más, se produce un fenómeno muy curioso. Dicen, si apostando, por decir algo, 10 pesos me he levantado 5 millones de dólares, si apuesto 100.000 pesos, el impacto que tengo en mi patrimonio es menor y la probabilidad de ganar que tengo es mucho mayor. Y no es cierto, muchos de ellos entran en la ludopatía y acaban perdiendo ese dinero. Pero no solo pierden el propio premio, sino su propio patrimonio y se les rompe la red de afectos. Ustedes saben que los griegos en su sabiduría definían 3 tipos de amor. Eros, la pasión, el deseo. Gracias a él estamos aquí. Gracias a él se mueve el mundo. Porque probablemente una de las palancas del coraje es el enamoramiento. O sea, lo que uno hace cuando está enamorado no lo hace en condiciones normales, ¿eh? Y lo hace o por la persona amada o por el proyecto del cual uno está enamorado. Los grandes emprendedores están enamorados de su trabajo. Y por eso hacen cosas que otros dicen, este tío está loco. No, es que está apasionado con lo que hace. Y o sabes lo que es la pasión o no lo sabes, porque altera toda tu percepción, toda tu química, y te permite enfrentarte a situaciones que en condiciones normales no te enfrentas. Eros. Filia, la amistad. Decía Aristóteles que gracias a ella yo le doy lo mejor de mí a mi amigo y él me da lo mejor de él a mí. Y por lo tanto, incorporo sus dones y él incorpora los míos. Por eso los grandes amigos al final se acaban mimetizando en algunos comportamientos, pensamientos, expresiones, gestos, movimientos, palabras, visión existencial. Y luego está ágape. Eros, filia, ágape, que es el amor que uno tiene por sus hijos. Es decir, aquel por el cual no te cuestionas si tienes que dar tu vida, la das y punto. Ese es el tema. Y el coraje tiene que ver con esas tres dimensiones, con la pasión, con la amistad, con la entrega total a aquellas personas a las que amamos. Séneca decía, no, y lo digo, y perdonen la expresión, porque en España han habido atentados terroristas y a mí indirectamente a un amigo mío le pasó una cosa así y dices, no, o sea, hay cosas por las cuales debemos seguir luchando, por la dignidad y por el valor de la vida, y no nos podemos resignar. Séneca decía, no es que no nos atrevemos porque las cosas son difíciles, más bien las hacemos difíciles cuando no nos atrevemos. Y esta frase es para paladearla. Las hacemos difíciles cuando no nos atrevemos. Miren, si ustedes se ponen a recordar situaciones difíciles de su vida en las que se han arriesgado, hayan traspasado esa zona de confort, se la hayan jugado, incluso frente a las críticas de su entorno que les pueden haber dicho, estás loco, no lo intentes, te vas a equivocar, porque muchas veces no solo tenemos que superar nuestro propio miedo, sino el miedo de nuestro entorno, que puede también ser un miedo heredado, es decir, que está en la célula de esa persona porque lo mamó de su padre y de su madre que vivieron una situación de penuria o de guerra civil o de guerra mundial y tenía sentido entonces, pero ha sido incorporado como un activo psicológico en el aquí y en el ahora que nos está inhibiendo un contacto objetivo con la realidad. Pero si ustedes se han atrevido, verán que cuando se atreven a por algo y lo consiguen, las emociones que les trae el recuerdo de aquel momento de riesgo son el humor, la alegría y la gratitud. Por tanto, las emociones vinculadas a cualquier proceso de coraje al final son tremendamente positivas, siempre y cuando hayamos hecho la lectura del aprendizaje si no nos ha ido bien, y si nos ha ido bien, por supuesto, esas emociones aparecen directamente, porque siempre podemos aprender. Arriesgarse. El riesgo es no arriesgarse en los tiempos que corren. El riesgo, sin duda, es no arriesgarse. Hay una historia preciosa que la vivió Isaac Perlman, que está considerado por muchos el mejor solista de violín contemporáneo. Y cuentan las crónicas que hace pocos años, hace unos 6 años, daba un concierto en el Lincoln Center de Nueva York, frente a miles de personas. Como mínimo habían pagado casi $200 por la entrada al concierto de Perlman. Cuenta Jack Riemer en una crónica que apareció en el New York Times, y que esa crónica o ese evento que les voy a contar elevó a Perlman ya a la categoría de leyenda viva. Cuenta que en el tercer movimiento de la obra que interpretaba entonces Perlman, acompañado de una orquesta sinfónica, ocurrió algo bastante poco habitual, y es que él, tras incorporarse de su camerino en el descanso, afinó de nuevo su Stradivarius, pero en ese momento que lo afinaba se le rompió una de las cuerdas del violín. La operación de cambiar una cuerda de violín, supongo que aquí habrá algún músico, algún violinista, lleva 10-15 minutos por lo pronto. Pero en un instrumento de precisión como este, más tiempo. Además, agravado por el hecho de que el señor Perlman, cuando era pequeño, tuvo poliomielitis, con lo cual se desplaza con muletas y con una estructura que le mantiene el torso erguido, con lo cual tenía que volver a anudarse, tomar las muletas, retirarse al camerino, volver a salir. Y eso implicaba que el auditorio tenía que esperarse por lo menos media hora. El director de orquesta se dirigió a Perlman y le dijo, Isaac, voy a avisar a micrófono abierto que tenemos que parar media hora. Y Perlman le miró y le dijo, no podemos hacer esperar a estas personas, no podemos. Pero ¿cómo que no? ¿Pero cómo vas a interpretar? Yo voy a interpretar con 3 cuerdas. ¿Pero cómo con 3 cuerdas? Sí, confía. Entonces, claro, el auditorio lo oyó, se generó una expectación bárbara y le dice el director, ¿estás seguro? Dice, tú tira hacia adelante y déjame improvisar. Y efectivamente el director de orquesta comenzó y cuando le tocó el solo de violín a Perlman, al parecer extrajo armónicos, arpegios, improvisó con lo que tenía y salvó perfectamente la representación. Les estoy contando esto no tanto por el hecho de que un gran maestro en una disciplina pueda salvar una crisis, porque para esto son los maestros, ¿no? Un maestro en artes marciales con una mano atada a la espalda te puede bloquear y te puede desplazar y te puede hacer daño si quiere. El mérito no está tanto en la aplicación de la maestría, sino en la actitud que subyace a lo que hizo Perlman y ahora les contaré, porque cuando acabó el concierto se generó una ovación extraordinaria, el público se levantó conmovido por escuchar